friends are synths.
There are many, many great things about living in the great city of Glasgow. Many shite things as well, to be honest. But one of the great things is that the city is home to Signal Sounds, which is a specialist synthesizer and electronic music technology shop. Signal Sounds stock all sorts of weird and wonderful devices, and their current showroom is a kind of veritable playground for synth freaks and geeks like myself. They often host events and stuff in there, and it is well worth paying them a visit if you happen to be in the area, though don't message me if you're here because I'll definitely be busy that day. Now, the owner of Signal Sounds is a guy called Jason. He's a really genuinely nice person and has been incredibly supportive of me and this channel over the years. Over the time that I've known him, I've come to discover there is something of an incredible personal synth collection which is currently lurking in the basement of the shop. So a couple of months ago, I dropped it in and got him to give me a behind-the-scenes tour, showing off the parts to Signal Sounds that you wouldn't normally get to see, and unexpectedly providing some really interesting synthesizer-related trivia. So I'm sharing it with you now, and I hope you enjoy. Definitely changed since I was last year.
Yeah, we've organised things slightly differently. This is Robert's dispatch area, so he does all of the mail order dispatch from here, and then this part is the kind of wholesale business to business distribution brands that we deal with. So we distribute Expert Sleepers worldwide, so if you're buying an Expert Sleepers module in Perfect Circuit in California, got there by us sending it over to them. We do Instruo, we do Wrong Electronics, we do Zcals, Lob Modular. Some brands we do worldwide, some of them are UK and EU only, just depends on the company and what our relationship is. We don't always have a bath here.
I did wonder about it. I wanted to know.
We've got two baths actually.
I was asking if that was a reverb experiment.
Sound tank.
Yeah.
Down here we use this room sometimes for videos, but we found that the showroom upstairs is just a nicer environment to do that kind of work. And then this is all just collections of some of my vintage stuff again, so there's all sorts of weird and wonderful bits and bobs in there. Old Roland, before they were Roland, Acetone, so that was like their very first synthesizer. Yeah.
Oh,
Voyager XL, which was the sort of fully expanded semi-modular version of the Voyager. Old digital synths as well, Korg Wave Station, and that in its turn was based on the Prophet VS, an old sequential synth.
Oh, yeah.
So when sequential went out of business, they were kind of bought over by Yamaha Korg. So Dave Smith took that synth and redesigned it for Korg and made it a more sort of affordable and practical for the kind of digital guys, because that was an old analog thing.
Is it like a synth museum down here?
There's lots of stuff.
That's a Russian thing, is it not?
That is a Ukrainian toy piano that I picked up on Reverb, which was just like, it's like a wee organ circuit, so it's just like brrr. But unfortunately it runs on Russian Ukrainian batteries, which are not available in the West. So the guy made me what is possibly the shonkiest power thing
is
that
that
I've ever
DC
seen.
to
9 volts.
that is
it's horrible.
Okay.
And then you can plug a 9 volt adapter in it, but it's
I think Simon and the Magpie has got one of them.
Yeah.
The exact one. I spotted a Wasp.
Yeah, so this is a Jasper, it's a Wasp clone. Pre-Behringer, it was a guy, I did a record for a guy in Texas, Downlow Records, and he is an analog synth freak, so he made about 10 of these and sold a few of them on. So
it's got a very nice wooden...
I know, yeah, hand done. It's all quite, not quite shonky, but quite kind of shonky. I have tidied up my studio. Don't tell him I tidied it though. I did tidy it. That is Kyle's repair room and test bed for various things. So Kyle does repairs and quality testing and so on, as well as just general fault finding for customers if they've sent something back in. You can't send it back to the manufacturer without saying, I've actually checked this and I know it's gubbed or it's not gubbed. and what's gubbed about it, and you can't just write gubbed on the
Right.
box either. You need to tell them.
A lot of Soma things here. I
Yeah,
see.
yep, always been pretty popular. They are releasing a turret version of the Pulsar 23. Basically, that is a utilities CV utility desktop thing which works with Pulsar 23, and instead of having the kind of machine-made pegs with the little sort of like 3 indents on it, they've just used standard sort of like 1-inch screws. So they've called it a turret. So it basically brings the cost price down. So they've got Pulsar 23s down to about 1,300 quid or something.
Wow.
So I wouldn't have thought that part would have been so expensive, but they said they had them made specifically for the Pulsars, and therefore they were much more expensive. And then stockroom mostly for modules. So this is the bedrock of it all.
Flipping heck. It's quite a lot of modules.
It's quite a lot of modules, yeah. It's all done by brand, so 1010s down here, 2HP, 4MS, blah blah blah, goes round in circles, and it's all alphabetically organised. And there's a bit of everything. It's dope. Dopefer's the biggest in terms of the amount of shelves it takes up. Dopefer starts there and goes all the way down there, and then all the way back up here and finishes about here.
I've never seen this many module boxes.
When we moved in here, we were like, we'll never fill this space, never. And it was just going to it seemed like an endless sort of empty field of space.
I remember being in here when you first moved in. There was lots of empty rooms down here. And now this is quite.
Now it's full. I mean, I quite like the idea of this room being like, this would have been great for having, doing sort of small underground parties or just having a bit of fun in it. But yeah, we filled it full of modules. And then the kind of smaller non-modular stuff is on these shelves around here. So that is all Arturia stuff, auto machines, Motu. We do a little bit of sort of more mainstream audio interfaces and so on too.
What's that, DTO?
DTO is a weird desktop noise synth. It was made by, I think it's IMO from Manifold Research's partner, possibly. But they were part of the kind of Instruo team at the very beginning. I think they split off into their own thing, and she made this weird, desktop noise generator. Kind of a bit like the Hikari Instruments type of stuff.
All right, cool. I like the very DIY.
Yeah, hand sprayed.
Yeah. These ones are interesting.
That is that landscape company, the guys that do the Noon.
Oh, and the tape thing as well.
Yeah, all their stuff's absolutely beautiful in terms of the aesthetics of it. It's like, it's more art than music. Yeah. So the main designer guy is I think a visual artist before he became a sort of electronics guy, and he's really into gestural control. He did a pole, like a pole dancing pole with electrical kind of resistance on it, and as part of this performance his partner would come on and she would do like pole dancing on this pole, but it was putting out CV and audio as well and processing it through a stereo field thing. So that's the kind of stuff that I really like, where you're like, it's not just another box, it's somebody who's got, I don't know, a really unusual outlook on both music composition and performance, and then they turn it into an instrument, which is quite a unique thing. And these are little touch sensors that they're called the all flesh controls, and you put them into CV inputs on a module, and instead of having to send a CV, you touch it. So it's a touch capacitive thing, but it's just, it looks really interesting, and it is interesting in terms of the way that people sort of interact with it, and it changes the way that you interact with what's a pretty standard sort of module and instrument. So yeah, I like stuff like that. That's the mixer that Auto Machines have made. So it's basically a small desktop analog mixer with overdrive and can't open it because it's got a big
Sorry.
Yeah, basically a desktop mixer with analog overdrive and a compressor on it. So I used that for my live performance at the Noise Box thing that we did recently, because it's got mini jack inputs on it, and at first everyone's like, I hate mini jacks, but I was using two of those Teenage Engineering T133 things, and they've got mini jack outs, and then I was using a 606 drum machine, so I just needed 1/4 inch to mini jack, and I was like, actually it's quite nice to just have something that's quite compact but still really high quality. I mean, it's a proper. This guy's a real expert on old analog mixing desks. He did Air's studio, the band Air, and I think might have worked in Daft Punk studio for a while as well. And he was a SSL console sort of repair guy in the 70s and 80s. So he's got a shitload of knowledge on that stuff. So he made what is a very, very high quality mixer, but in a small desktop format with mini jack-ins.
It looks beautiful. I've seen it online. It
Yeah,
looks amazing.
aesthetically as well. So the people that did all of his graphics and design are a French design agency that worked for, I think they said they worked for Chanel and things like that. So high-end kind of graphic design people, and you can just tell. He designed the interface, but they did the graphics and made it look how it looks, and even just the way that the boxes are, and just a simplistic kind of graphic idea like that. It shows what the instrument is really well without, if it's just a brown box. You know, you can do a lot with little sometimes.
I've got the Bim Bam and Boom, and I had the Bim, I think, for years. Got it from here, and it stopped working like after, I don't know, 4 years or something. Something went wrong with it, and I emailed him. It was way out of warranty, and he was like, "Send it back." Didn't charge a thing. I think it covered the postage as well, and it was like, that's
the only
service.
weird thing about his mixer is it's got no effects send or return.
Right.
Now that's strange for somebody who's made their entire, like previously every product he made was an effect processor of some sort. Now you can run things through these machines in line so that each effect is with a specific instrument, and maybe that's what was in his head, but everyone was kind of like, you made a mixer with no effect sends, but all you make is effects. That's a bit strange. But anyway, can't have everything. Limitations and all that. Limitations. And then Moog, bye-bye Moog. So we don't do Moog anymore.
Oh, really?
Well,
yes.
they were bought over when they went out of business, and music bought them over, and unfortunately they sort of narrowed the dealership a little bit, and we don't have access to them anymore, which is a shame because they're now doing some really, really good stuff again.
What's the latest one?
The Muse. So it's like an 8-voice analog polysynth, and it's like the best bits out of the one synth that they did, and some of the stuff out of the Matriarch and so on. So a bit frustrating, but you know.
The one I'd
we'll
seen was
survive.
the
Spectravox?
No.
The
one
Mirror or something like that.
Yeah, it's
Is it like some other 32 size type of thing? Yeah. So apparently these were all sitting in the background for ages, and they should have been released like 4 or 5 years ago, but they just got themselves into a bit of a cycle of, we've got no money, we need to make Mother 32 so we can get some money, or that means we can't, because they were a very small production. There was only 40 people worked in production, and it was all hand built in America. So I went to the factory about just before COVID actually, and it was really interesting to see them. It was very old school. It was like big long wooden desks with like 4 people at each station, so literally just soldering, get the meter out, testing, soldering, and you know, quite a labour intensive way of producing. So it meant that their prices were high compared to the sort of Chinese and Taiwanese manufacturers, which I think eventually kind of made them go in a bit of a tailspin. And then I have got a recently tidied
another room.
Studio.
This is the serious room.
Yeah, so this is basically, when I first moved in here, I was like, right, finally I'm going to have a space for making music again, because I didn't have a space at home that was practical for making music for like 8 or 9 years, and I also was getting severe grief from my other half for having so much gear sitting about not doing anything and taking up half our kind of our attic space, and our kind of converted attic was all taken up with synthesizers. So it was just nice to have a new space to bring everything together, and you know, I'd lent out a lot of gear over the years, so I kind of pulled it all back in, and just it's here for the rare moments when I get time to actually switch it on.
So you're saying you only run a shop so you could have this basically?
Some people have suggested that. I couldn't possibly comment. Yeah, I mean, it's a nice wee space, and we do the radio show for Radio Buena Vida, so we've got a little setup over here, and me and Craig do a recording once a month in here to kind of keep that going as well, which is quite a nice way of spending just an evening, just listening to records and talking shit about records.
Having a wee whiskey.
And having a wee whiskey or two.
Yeah,
occasionally.
Is that the...
Occasionally. So not everything in here is plugged in. What I've tried to do is make a kind of shape here where all this stuff's plugged in, and then what I do is, because these are on rails, you can just move everything about quite easily, and it's quite easy to swap synths in and out and just swap the MIDI cables and the audio cables, and it means I can keep it fresh if I want to keep changing instruments around. It's pretty straightforward to do that. Still a work in progress, but I think all studios are a work in progress.
Some nice speakers, Genelec.
Those were the only sort of major investment I made when I had this room. I was like, I really want a high-end pair of really nice Genelecs, and those are the kind of the 1 series that they do, which are the sort of top end of their kind of studio range before you go into the full soffit fitted mega big 5-way speakers, and they're fantastic. They calibrated for this room as well, which is really nice. It does make a difference.
909 here, signed by Jeff Mills.
Indeed,
is it?
yeah. So we had him do an in-store at Rubadub when I was there, when he was doing the Exhibitionist DVD, and he was playing at the Archies. So he did the in-store for us, which was, as you would imagine, absolutely fucking mobbed. And then we did a showing of the documentary, and then a wee Q&A. And then because he was playing at the Archies that night, the Slam guys were hiring a 909 from Dan that also worked at Rubadub. And so he pulled his 909 up and said, Jeff, would you sign my 909? And I happened to have mine in at the same time. And I was like, there's no fucking way he's getting his 909 signed. Mine isn't getting signed. But the one thing was I forgot to clean it beforehand, and it is, you can't maybe see it in this light, but it's really grotty. And I'm kind of like, will it ever clean it? It's got techno grime on it.
500 series, I see your
500 series stuff is funny. I really like it, and I've got some API stuff which is really nice to use, but it's just not ever became a big thing. Like anytime I speak to anyone that works in other music shops that sell 500 series, it's a very limited audience, and you would think it would have maybe benefited from people's sort of move into the modular scene, where people have got a much better idea about chaining things together and putting them in cases as well. But it hasn't. It seems to be a very small audience of producers that want to move from studio to studio but want a signal chain that they can take with them, or just the odd people that are really into it. It seems like people that are into outboard gear don't mind having 19-inch rack stuff, basically. There's a couple of Moog delays and filters. So the filter is basically the MF101 Mooger Fooger pedal, but with an expanded full frequency range. I think the pedal cuts off at 12k and that goes up to 20k. And the delay is the MF104 Mooger Fooger pedal as well. And then Eventide did a couple of sort of basic delay units as well. So it's a combination filters, delays, and more delays. That's kind of bread and butter stuff.
MSQ 700 lurking in the corner.
So I like little weird, I suppose just little bits of history really that are, sometimes they're transitions from one part of music technology to another. So that came out just after Roland had kind of abandoned Sync 24, and when CV and Gate was moving out, because most of the new keyboards that were coming out were polyphonic, so CV and Gate wasn't as good. But they still hadn't really worked out the best way of recording MIDI, and computers weren't doing anything in music at that point. There was no Macs, there was no PCs to speak of when these things were coming out. This is the early 80s, so we're talking like ZX Spectrum, Amiga type of home computing levels. Now there were eventually bits of kind of MIDI interfaces for those instruments, but essentially what they were trying to do was work out a way of working that you could record, chords and performances into a small box, but then somehow manipulate it. It was quite a challenging thing to think of. We're all used to standard DAW timelines, and we've all pretty much grown up with that. But they had nothing to base their ideas on in terms of like, well, how do you make something that's musical, works, quantizes? You can't copy and paste parts, for instance. You basically would have to play things in on 3 different tracks if you wanted the same part. Just a lot of things that we take for granted were not not very common back then. So I like things that represent that, and it's not necessarily that is a fantastic sequencer. It's just an interesting bit of technology.
What's the retro kits thing? It's not based on that one, right?
No, it's based on an MMT8, which we've got upstairs.
Ah, cool.
That's called an RK008, and it's like the dinkiest little thing in the world. And I like that because I liked it when he showed me the prototype. I was like, that's really cool, but it looks really fiddly, but it's not. It's actually a really well thought out sequencer, and considering it's basically 2 MMT8s in the tiniest little box, I was amazed that he kind of got it into something that worked really well. But it's cool.
Yeah, they make some cool stuff.
What, the retro kits guys? Yeah. I'd only ever really seen that that smart MIDI cable thing that they did for the Volcas, and then they expanded that into working with loads of different instruments. But yeah, he's a really smart guy, and like they've definitely made some cool stuff. And then drum machines galore up there. So RZ1 was a really early sampling drum machine. It's got, I think, 1.2 seconds of sampling. So not great for drum loops, but, you know, for a raw kind of 8-bit overdriven sound, that was a machine that they used on a lot of really early house stuff, on Dance Mania in particular, quite well known for like sort of ghetto house type of effects. Yamaha's drum machines aren't really as well respected as obviously the Roland equivalents from the same time, but again, quite a brash kind of 80s sound to them. But I really like them. I like all this stuff for different reasons. Some of it just has its own unique sound, some of it is just quirky, and some of it's just things that you've grown up with that you really liked.
303, is that
303's hiding away in the corner, yeah.
Oh,
Had that since the early 90s, I would say. Most of the stuff apart from the more modern like Waldorf and Moog bits, most of the stuff I've had since I first bought it. I'm more of a buyer than a seller when it comes to gear. A hoarder, that's the word.
Oh, this is the big version of that.
That's the word.
Alesis.
Yeah. Micron.
Ion?
Micron, so that's the Ion. Yeah. And again, I quite like companies that sometimes step out of their normal kind of routines. And when they brought that out, it was like, oh, really wasn't expecting that. They'd done the Andromeda before that, but that was an analog polysynth, and that was kind of competing with the Nords of the time, and maybe up against the Yamaha AN1X, which I discovered recently was also a Dave Smith design from Sequential Circuits. He was still doing consultancy work for Yamaha at the time. But these were virtual analog recreations of kind of analog synths. But they've just got their own... They're not... Sometimes in trying to be something, you end up being something else. So they were trying to copy or mimic certain old types of synths, but with it being a digital and quite early digital technology, it didn't always come out exactly how they intended. And that's the things I like as well, the things that take you down a slightly different path rather than, I think some of the, say, Roland boutique stuff that's about these days is a precise digital recreation of old analog gear, and there is something to be said for that, but these things are just more quirky and interesting to me than just doing a straight digital copy of a Juno 106. And I'm not criticising it, it's just that that's their approach, and that's totally fine. But for me, I like things that are just a little bit left of centre.
I'm the same.